In case you didn't know, Thomas, you're a clinical psychiatrist, academic, and author of 8 books and 47 scientific papers, including The Secret Life of the Unborn Child, a profoundly important book at a time when it was as critical as it is now to have the book that you've just published out in the world. It was published in 27 countries. In 1988, Thomas founded APPA, the Association for Prenatal and Perinatal Psychology and Health. Last month, I talked with its current president, Raylene Phillips, and if you hadn't seen it, you can see the highlights of it if you go to our website. Thomas is one of the major voices in our featured documentary that was available to everyone in Utero, which I produced, after which I have counted him as a friend and an inspiration. I found him to be one of those practitioners and theorists and just human beings whose curiosity and intellect continually moves himself outside the box, which often puts him at odds with the status quo until the status quo catches up to him, expanding the box just enough so that he can move outside of it again. That's my experience of Thomas. So, Thomas, it's a delight to have you on our webisode tonight. Why don't you give us a few words, and then I will start to dive into some questions.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Yes, and thank you for all the participants for participating, and I look forward to your questions. Fire away.
Well, I think the thing that the theme here, the core theme or the focus, despite the tremendous amount of science, is the profound importance of early trauma.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that we're really looking at in terms of a thing like the Ukraine, which is now unfolding, is how do we in the future deal with the children who will grow up to be adults who are going to be profoundly traumatized, and equally important, how do we deal with the children or even the unborn or about to be born children or about to be conceived children who can then be less traumatized. So we, as you say, womb ecology really is about global ecology.
So all of those people, all those children, I mean, so what to deal with them? I mean, we just don't have the resources in the world in terms of psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists to deal with this kind of a trauma. So I think that it will be mostly through helping them, get clothing and food and medical help, and then later on we will deal with the ones who have been most severely traumatized.
So I want to go now to let's take a little time, and I want to address the book's profound journey through science. I want to try and do it relatively quickly, but could you just talk a little bit about epigenetics and how it involves actually focusing on early trauma?
Well, with epigenetics, we have found out that actually, most of the genome does not consist of genes. It consists of little switches, which are called methyl groups and acetyl groups, scientifically. And these switches determine which genes are turned on and which are turned off, or partially turned on, or partially turned off, everything in between. So that is incredibly important because it is the environment, which includes the mother, of course, when the baby is in utero. Everything that the mother eats, drinks, what she thinks, how she acts, the music that she listens to, all those things will affect those switches, and some of them then will be activated. Some genes will be deactivated, and so what the mother experiences and what we experience later on in life, every moment, our genes are changing in terms of their expression. So it becomes incredibly important, how we live our lives, what we eat, what we drink, all those things matter. And in terms of children, of course, and trauma, depending on the severity of the trauma, of course, more and more genes could be turned off or turned on, but all of that is going to have a negative effect. Like there's no way that trauma or stress can have a positive effect. In the past, in the past, a lot of doctors thought that, stress makes you strong, it builds character. That's total nonsense.
No.
Um, it, it it's like having a broken leg. It does not make your leg stronger when that leg heals. It will always be, a little bit less strong than it was before it was injured. And it's the same thing with our personality and with our brain and mind. These traumas leave behind wounds and perhaps scar tissue.
The idea that you nurture your child, that you're there for the little baby, that you're there from conception on or even before, that just the thinking on all these different levels, and you've talked about this a lot, that this is a radical idea for a lot of people. You just got to be nourishing this the way you would a plant, the way you would it's so obvious, and yet for some reason we've had millennia that have gone the other direction.
Yes, it's true. It's true. Some of it, I think, may be due to our patriarchal society, which we have had for millions of years. I don't know how long. The patriarchal society sort of develops develops a not response, but an admiration of the head, like head of state. He's the head of the tribe. He's the head of the family, and it's always he, hardly ever she. And so it's this emphasis on the head, which has also influenced science. So everything in our science is always about the brain.
So in a way, what we're talking about here is that we have been looking at the human organism through the lens of a patriarchal world, that there is a male god or a male leader who is running the whole thing, and everything else is subservient to that. And yet everything in science, really over the last 30 years, has been increasingly pointing out, as you've really laid out in your book, that the entire body has brain cells. The entire body is holding memory.
It took me 7 years to write this book. And one of the reasons that it took so long is because it took me into territories that I was totally unfamiliar with. Like, what did I really know about epigenetics? Zero. What did I know about quantum mechanics? Very, very little. So I had to learn this on my own.
Can you talk a little bit about the heart and the gut as memory thinking organisms that are profoundly important in terms of memory and everything else that goes on in life?
Well, people have not given enough credit to the gut. That's for absolutely certain. Almost every week, sometimes every day, I find out new things about what's happening in the gut. And some time ago already, there were a couple of doctors whose names I forgot. I would have to look it up. There were a couple of doctors who referred to the gut as the second brain. And most people don't realize that serotonin, which now everybody knows because of Prozac and serum reuptake inhibitor drugs, about 80% of serotonin producing cells are in the gut. They're not in the brain. They're not in the brain. We carry about 5 pounds of bacteria and viruses in our gut. 5 pounds, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And these bacteria are incredibly important in terms of our health. And having good bacteria will more or less guarantee you good health. It has been found, for example, that people with cardiac problems, heart attacks, have diseased germs in their gut. There is the vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve, comes out of the brain, number 10, there are 12. Interestingly, it supplies the heart and the gut. So it is through the vagus nerve that signals go from the brain down to the heart and the gut, but also vice versa. And that's where my emphasis is. Um, there is nothing wrong with describing the direction from the brain down to the heart and the gut, but not to the point where the other way is neglected. And that's where I come in and try to focus on. And so it's very important for us to know who we are. And one of the reasons, selfhood, one of the avenues to good selfhood, to a good self-concept, is to be in touch with your body. And so the more we can become aware of our heartbeats, for example, is it regular? If it gets irregular, we start feeling anxious. We don't even realize why we are feeling anxious, but we are feeling anxious because we are getting these signals from the heart. It's beating too fast. It's telling us that we are upset. And the same is our guts. And, in terms of practical applications, like speaking of that, our pharmaceutical industry, for example, when they are looking for a drug to counteract Alzheimer's, because everybody believes that Alzheimer's is a disease of the brain, which it is, they are looking for answers in the brain. And that is very limiting because we know that there are other factors that influence the brain, such as cardiac disease, for example. Everybody knows that people who have any kind of heart problems have a much higher rate of Alzheimer's. Now, why should that be? So these are the kinds of things that we need to look into. And I hope, that as some of these ideas that I'm proposing become more well known, that they will have an effect both in medicine, because one of the problems in medicine is that cardiologists only look after the heart, neurologists will only look after the neurons and the brain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So everybody is incredibly specialized. And what we need really are people who are unifiers instead of specializers.
And so I want to go to I want to rephrase slightly a premise you bring up in the book. I might get it slightly wrong, but let's just go there, because now let's go one step deeper than heart and gut to cells hold memory.
Yes.
The memory is fully retrievable. When cells grow up, they remember their childhood all the way back to conception. So talk about it a little bit more. Let's explore that.
But what?
To the fact that cells hold a memory all the way back to conception.
It is amazing that these researchers were able to trace these cells to their very beginning. Right after conception, or very early on in the life of that baby. And the way I look at the body is a little bit like a symphony orchestra.
Yeah.
Like 120 people and the conductor, and each person has a different instrument, and they play their instrument, and it all comes together into this beautiful sound. And so that's how I see, the hundreds and hundreds and thousands and millions of cells, that each of them, has this tiny one little voice, one little memory. I refer to them as micro memories. And they together, they create a whole connected kind of a picture or memory of something that happened in the past.
I want to go back to one thing you talked about earlier, the metaphor of the orchestra.
Yeah.
Because you have this orchestra, this massive, almost infinite sized orchestra in each of us. what happens when that orchestra, which is playing this natural, beautiful tune, working together, gets traumatized? And what does that orchestra now sound like, sort of metaphorically? And can other people pick that up from your perspective?
Expect trouble. This is not going to end well. But in terms of the other thing, the transmission to somebody else, which is the second part of your question, I think.
Yep.
I think that happens all the time. And again, it's the kind of thing that people are not aware of because we put out vibrations all the time, right? And sometimes people talk about, oh, that politician, he's got charisma. And yeah, some people have. But that's just part of their energy that they are putting out.
Late in the book, you talk about it as electromagnetic field as you kind of
Yeah.
get into it. You want to kind of approach it from that angle a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think that when my heart synchronizes with your heart, that's when we feel, and that's when we feel connected, right?
Right.
So a lot of research has shown that people in groups, when they are really getting along, they think they're getting along because of what they were talking and thinking about. But in fact, the real reason that they're getting along is because both their brains and their hearts have connected and they are in sync. And so when our hearts are in sync with the person next to you, that's when you feel friendly. That's when you fall in love. People say fall in love. They have no idea. Love is blind, right? Well, yeah, it doesn't have to look. All you have to do is sense the other person's heart.
Let's dissect that a little bit, because one of the things I've talked about at various times, particularly with people that I've worked with, I'm not a therapist, but I'm a practitioner. That's what we do at the Institute. We're not therapists, but we work with people to help them see themselves through this process of resonating. But one of the things that does seem to happen is, let's say you're a little kid and your mother is messed up,
Yeah.
struggling, not there for you. So you get this relationship, and there's a level of, there's whatever that relationship is, you name it, there's different versions of it. Isn't it also true that what you're drawn to is exactly the same kind of woman if you're a man, and if you're, either way, you're drawn to not necessarily what is going to help you, but it's what you're familiar with on a very, very deep level.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've got some great examples of that in my book. For example, experiments were done with little with the eggs of frogs, and in the liquid in which the eggs were kept, the researchers put in two different substances. One was citrus flavored. I forgot what the other one was. Anyway, when the eggs hatched and became tadpoles, the tadpoles preferred the taste that they were exposed to as eggs. And when they grew up, which is even more amazing, okay, when the tadpole became a frog, they still preferred the same substances that they were exposed to. That's why people always talk about their motherland, and how they're attracted to the places that they were raised in, or the people they were raised by. The familiar one always has an imprint on our minds, and we are drawn to it.
And when you think about, you said earlier, we need to know who we are on a physical level. You were talking about it, but so many of us don't know really who we are. Who are we? What are we? What in the world is it that we are? So often we don't allow ourselves to begin to explore that. I want to come back to, just for a moment again, that orchestra metaphor, because we're talking about a massive orchestra as a little child, for instance, dealing with the other massive orchestra over there that's the mother, the father, the siblings, whatever. And this dance is going on that is so complex. And we don't give ourselves nearly enough attention to how miraculous we are and how complicated we are.
Yes, yes. I mean, every cell is the most amazing machine that has ever been devised, you know? It is beyond understanding how incredibly complicated it is, and you can drill further and further and further into it and find new and new and new things all the time. It is truly amazing.
But the one thing I have some lack of understanding about is the vagus nerve. You want to just talk a little bit about the vagus nerve?
Oh yeah, sure, that's easy. Uh, the vagus nerve, like I said, is the tenth nerve coming out of the brain. All the nerves essentially stay in the brain, but that one goes all the way down to the gut, and it's a two way street. It carries signals from the brain, from the higher centers in the brain, to the heart, and also to the gut. So yes, when you are stressed, some of the stress signals will travel to the heart. You will increase your heartbeats. You will increase digestion in your gastrointestinal tract. On the other hand, when a woman is stressed, unfortunately, what happens is that most of her blood is directed to the large muscles of of the arms and the legs in order to make you ready to fight or to flee. And a lot of the blood is taken away from the gut, but also away from the uterus. So if you are carrying a baby in your womb, when you are stressed, that baby is going to get less blood supply, which then means less nutrients, less oxygen. Again, this is not beneficial, obviously. So the sympathetic system is your fight flight, and it will signal to the rest of the body that you are, in a state of emergency. And so that happens through the vagus nerve, and it happens through the blood system and the hormones that are being produced. But also, like I said, there is the other direction, from the gut up and from the heart up to the brain. So that is going to make a difference.
Where do we put our focus in our own world as much as we can? One is to help pregnant mothers make it as easy as possible, as wonderful an environment as possible for that little child to evolve and develop naturally. That's number one. The problem is that we have to have the mother having done enough work on herself to be able to do this in a genuine way. One of the things Raylene Phillips talked about last month was it's not about being perfectly serene and meditating. It's about being a genuine human being, about being honest, about going, yeah, I lost my temper here, and that's not about you, or even sometimes it is, because the baby definitely feels all these things. The baby is picking these up. Now that's in itself something a lot of people don't really understand.
Like right from the beginning, I mean, from 82, I guess, 1982, I think my book came out. I think since that time, I have always said to pregnant women or people asking me that question, what do you say to a child in utero? Okay, like what are you supposed to say? And I just say what comes to your mind. It does not have to be a philosophical diatribe. It does not have to be a sermon on the mountain. Just just say what the weather is like, right? And today I'm talking to Stephen Gyllenhaal, and that's really a wonderful experience. Just say whatever comes to your mind. I mean, let's say that parents are having an argument, and the woman is pregnant. Well, my advice has always been, explain to your child what just happened. Okay, your daddy and I had a misunderstanding. We shouted a little bit, but that has nothing to do with you. We love you. We look forward to seeing you. It's important to make those explanations.
I want to come back to trauma a little bit more. In the book, you quote, I think it's Aaron Applefield, with the
Yes,
quote, "The war sits in
in
all my bones."
yes, yes.
Can you talk about that a little?
Well, I don't think that I don't think we forget anything that has ever happened to us, but we only forget it in our brain. But where we keep everything is really in our bodies. I mean, the way I got into this book, into the embodied mind, uh, was by way of reading in one of the medical journals about a French civil servant who, at the age of 44, went to the hospital or went to see his physician because he had a weakness in his left leg, and so they started doing studies on him. And one of the things that they did was an X-ray of the head, and they found out that he had virtually no brain. His skull was filled with cerebrospinal fluid. The medical term for that is hydrocephalus. And he had a small crescent of brain tissue. He was a married father of two. He was a civil servant, uh, had a good job. For all intents and purposes, he was perfectly normal. So when I read that, it was sort of like Newton watching the apple fall, like, how is this possible? This doesn't make sense. How can a person with no brain function so well? So it was that it was that example which then set me on this path of trying to find out, trying to find the answer to that question. So the only the only explanation for that I could find, which is different, I will tell you what neurologists tell me. But the one that makes sense to me was that the body acts like a backup system,
Mm-hmm.
and that it is in the body that sort of we also keep memories. And then when the brain is gone, well, the backup system, like a backup generator, when the electricity is off, it clicks in. What neurologists say is that the part of the brain which is still intact, which would be like the lower functioning hindbrain and lower functioning brain, takes over, takes over the functions of the brain, which makes no sense at all to me because those sections of the brain have enough work as it is, and they are very specialized. And I don't really think, but I mean, this is my hypothesis. One of these days, hopefully, it will be proven or disproven. But my hypothesis is that it's really the billions and billions of cells of the body which take over. And my reason for thinking that, by the way, is are some very interesting studies which have been done on planarians and also hibernating animals, and and they all show that when the brain is severely destroyed, memories are not destroyed, or not all of them anyway.
Why would one person be able to adapt their body to having a brain and someone else doesn't?
I think that there are huge differences, between people, between the way their brain is organized, between the way their body is organized, all their experiences before the trauma happens or before anything happens. And also the experiences of their parents and grandparents,
Yeah,
and who knows how many generations back.
yeah.
So all of those things matter. All of those things will in some way influence who you are. You have to be able to put up with ambiguity.
Yeah.
Okay? If you're looking for 2 plus 2 is equal 4, you're not going to find it in quantum mechanics because we can't even locate a place where a particle is going to be for certainty. All
Yeah.
you all you can tell is, which is also incredibly interesting, is that when two particles who were at one time joined continue to be joined forever, although they might be like thousands of miles apart. Ambiguity is very, very important. And if if you can't put up with ambiguity, you better stick to Newtonian science. Don't get into quantum mechanics.
But even Newtonian science is a problem because the inventor of it and the people who as you say, the people who come up with these, Darwin, for instance, was willing to keep going outside the box. So when it turns into a religion, there's a value to it, but it has to be. We have to move on. We have to keep moving on. So do we have any questions now, Derek? Is there anything?
So towards the end of the film, you switched gears from describing the problem, how the experiences of families during pregnancy and babies during early life influence their outcome. I have to admit, I was rethinking all the things that happened to me and my children early on and thought, oh God, it's hopeless. And then there was that moment towards the end where you talked about love being the answer. And I was actually hoping tonight that maybe we'd have a conversation about how we could be better addressing families, how we could be better supporting families, what programs are in existence, and where we should go from here to take care of and heal expectant mothers, families, babies.
First of all, you should go to APPA. These websites are very, very valuable to see how you can be helpful in terms of pregnant, expectant mothers, and pass on the information, give the film In Utero to people who are adults who are dealing with their trauma, not so much expectant parents. That new documentary, The Bond, will be addressing that issue. The other thing is that since making the movie, I encountered a form of adult self-encountering, I don't want to call it therapy because it's really about handing over the healing to the person, not the therapist, but which is what is also I'm involved with. It's also who's presenting this webinar, and you can just go to the Identity Development Institute, and it's all about, and we'll talk a little bit about this tied in with Thomas's book about a way to clean this stuff up in adults. And also, if you're a pregnant mother, to do some of this work either in the Institute or through APPA. There are a number of programs that are really designed now to address the trauma that impacts grown-ups who then, when they're both fathers and mothers, who then impact the unborn child, and also just live their lives in a way that's not so effective. And I can speak for myself, it changed my life. Discovering this methodology, I went from being passively chaotic to being a little bit better. And you can follow up, reach out to us and we'll certainly help in that front. That's what this is about underneath it all. And Thomas's books really do address it in the science of it. So you can become very committed to what the methods are. But we can definitely follow up on that.
So I would definitely like to address your question, Gail, and that is actually the mission and vision of APPA, Association for Prenatal and Perinatal Psychology and Health, for those who haven't heard of us. Our website is birthpsychology.com, and that we're entirely focused on how we can help to prevent this kind of trauma being passed from one generation to the next, and how we can heal existing trauma. And we can't always even prevent it, but there are ways we can minimize trauma that's already happened and heal it. So that's our entire mission. And so I really would encourage you and anyone else to come to see what we have to offer. And we're always seeking ways to improve. And I can also endorse the Identity Development Institute and the methodology that's being used. It has been very helpful in the same kind of way that Stephen has described. But I also wanted to address something that Thomas had said earlier about the fact that in his professional capacity, he has only heard his patients remember traumatic memories in the womb and at birth. And I think there's an explanation for that, because there are many, 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 many hundreds of stories of good memories or neutral memories of babies, children remembering things that happened in the womb. But it's the traumatic ones that end up in his office, in your office, Thomas. They're more likely to bring the traumatic memories to a psychiatrist. So it's very understandable that you would hear those kind of memories. But I've heard so many stories of children and even some adults who remember very pleasant memories of being in the womb. And those, of course, are what we're trying to promote more of in the movie, The Bond, and in the work we do with APPA and with Stephen's work.
Also, I want to just add something to that, because having done the work I've done, which goes back to conception and which people help with resonating. We'll talk a little bit about resonating toward the very end of some of these questions here. I have gone back to people have sensed from my own experience, which was complex, a lot about my being in the womb.
I'm in Australia, and I'm a midwife and a nurse, and I work in the maternity unit in Alice Springs, so it's in the center of Australia, where more than 80% of the population that we look after as pregnant women are Aboriginal women. But I still find hard to find the pathway to raise an awareness about how important it is to provide sort of a trauma-informed care rather than a curative care, because we see that we see the connection between trauma, epigenetics, the neurobiology, all those things that are based on evidence, but we still see the reluctance. I don't know why, in the people high up there in the health system to embrace this sort of treatment and care to our women. And I wonder if you have any suggestions how can I start raising that awareness?
It's a combination of educating and moving toward the mainstream form of education, which is happening. I mean, the science has been moving forward actually quite quickly. ACEs, which is a big deal in the United States, adverse childhood experiences, which really goes to about 3 to 4 years old up to the present, has really been embraced by the psychological community. What they're missing still is early trauma. And that's what we're about. That's what APPA's about. It's what the Institute's about. It's what Thomas has been about from the beginning. I mean, none of this work would be, frankly, none of this would be where it was if it wasn't for Thomas being outside the box with John Chamberlain kind of putting this together when everyone thought they were, as crazy as Galileo. It's our mission. Part of the Institute's mission is education, education, education. Films on the bond, films on sleep training, and APPA is directly connected with us on doing this. So just use the tools that we're beginning to get out to you. Use In Utero and use the bond when it comes out.
Networking is terribly important.
Mm-hmm.
Make friends with people who are perhaps in power and also in the media. Try to get interviews. Try to get some of your ideas on paper in the local newspapers. Try to be a guest on a podcast. You got to do PR. You got to do a lot of public relations.
I think part of what makes us hesitate reaching out, first of all, it's not what people want to hear, but it does help to be working on yourself. I mean, I know that I'm now doing things that I would never have done 5 years ago. And that's why I really do it. To work out who you are and why you are who you are, and you understand that and you forgive the mistakes you make, and you bring those pieces together that have been separate. You bring the brain, the gut, the heart together, working better. Then you're not afraid of the boss. Then you're not afraid of going on a podcast. Then you're not afraid of being and inviting people to see In Utero, for instance. Bring 10 people together and see it, or to see the bond. You become less and less thinking twice about doing stuff. You just do stuff. So let's just get out there and talk about it and not worry about it so much. But I think that's a piece of it that I certainly struggled with at times in my life.
And so we have done that. And we have an incredible amount. By this, I mean pre and perinatal psychology, APPA. We have an incredible amount of solid research to back up all our claims. So if you are equipped with that, if you are armored with that science, you have nothing to fear. And you have to go out there and tell people about what you have discovered, and they will change. If you believe in it, they will believe in it.
What can a couple do to stop transgenerational trauma before the conception of their baby?
Well, very, very simply, live a good life. Eat properly, don't smoke, don't drink too much, be happy, be optimistic, avoid stress if you possibly can. Use any method that will help you to feel relaxed, whether it's listening to music, whether it's going to a play, whether it's dancing. Nature walks are terrific. All the research shows that people who spend time outdoors are happier, better adjusted, healthier. Having a pet also seems to be helpful, particularly dogs. They bring a lot of happiness to people. Also, they make you exercise. And if you were living where I'm living, which is just outside of Toronto in a small town, Stratford, there is snow all around. And the only thing that will ever get me out is to take the dog for a walk. So dogs have many functions, and that's one of them. And they take you walking. So yeah, I would say that all those things are important. The important thing is to be, healthy and happy. That's what you can do. And you have to be really honest with yourself as a couple that is about to start a family. I think it's very important for a couple to be honest and to look at themselves and say, do I have any problems? Is there something in me that needs healing? Okay, is there a trauma perhaps that I have just pushed under the rug that I don't know about? But if there is no trauma, and if you're happy, and if you're well adjusted, well, do yoga. You don't need therapy. That's all I want to say.
And I'll just add one more thing. I think the real job of therapy, of any of these things, is to do it and move beyond it. It's not to do it your whole life. It's to do it enough so you get to live fully in life, because life's going to teach you more and be a better, quote, therapist than anything else. The loved ones in your life who you love and hate, both of those things are what are going to teach you the most.
So I just want to say how much I enjoyed talking to you, Stephen. I hope we can do this again. And, good luck on all your work. It's wonderful. I look forward to seeing the next movie. And I want to thank Raylene and everybody else who has come and listened to our discussion. And see you next time we do this, okay?
And also, I think you were saying that you're starting a podcast maybe, and you invited me onto it. Will be delighted to come onto it and support all of that. It's all about informing everyone, and we'll keep everyone alerted to Thomas's continuingly to move out of the box so it can keep being expanded. It's been a real honor and a real pleasure, Thomas. As usual, I'm not surprised at all to have had this conversation with you, and for everyone else who participated.
Take care. Good night.
Okay, good night.